First, Nancy, thanks for talking to us tonight, and thank you to all the attendees. We're excited to be here with you.
One of the things our book really points out, we discuss 43 different settlements in Ohio, and there are probably at least 100 different settlements, but it's very hard to find documentation on them. But a number of these settlements came about because slave holders decided to free their slaves, usually upon their death. They put it in their wills that they would be freed. Some decided to do it while they were still alive, but in slave states, you weren't free to just liberate your slaves. If you're going to liberate them, you need to take them someplace else to a free state. And Ohio was the first free state from its conception or inception. And so what you had were a number of slave owners that decided that Ohio would be the place to bring their slaves and free them. And we discussed, the Randolph slaves and the Gist slaves were the two largest slave holders. And the Randolph came and the Gist basically populated a number of these communities just because their slave holdings were so large. They were freeing 400 or more slaves at one time. Well, they ran into problems with the Randolph slaves because the land they purchased, the people wouldn't allow them to settle there. So they were driven back to the canal boats, and then they were dispersed through northwestern Ohio. With the Gist slaves, they bought some extremely bad land for them in Brown County and in Hillsborough and Highland County, and settled them there, expecting them to be able to sustain themselves by farming. And most of these were farming communities. Well, the land in Brown County was basically unfarmable. And not only that, a lot of these slaves weren't farmers, or if they were farmers, they weren't used to growing the types of crops that we grow in Ohio. Now, they knew how to tend cotton, and they knew how to tend tobacco, which grows down along the Ohio River.
But not so well.
Yeah.
Middle and northern Ohio.
But you middle in the middle of the state, and they're expected to live off of this. And you had problems with the Gist slaves, especially where the guy who purchased the land also kept the title for it himself. And so land that was supposed to be in the name of these slaves, he was holding on to it. And that meant that when taxes came due, none of them individually knew that they were responsible for paying taxes on this land.
Wow.
And what you see happening in a lot of these situations throughout the state was that they ended up losing the land because it was sold for back taxes. That happened with Gist slaves. It happened with slaves in the southeastern part of the state as well, former slaves, formerly. And so this was their inheritance, and it basically was taken back from them. They generally didn't locate along the canals because that would attract attention.
And that would also be some prime land too, if you had work along there, and they were not being granted prime land by any means. Except for a couple of instances, these groups were being given the worst possible land. We talk about the agents were either crooked by nature or just
very naive
and trying their best. But either way, a lot of the land that was purchased for the enslaved people was terrible, terrible land.
They were coming into the settlements long before that. I mean, they were coming into Ohio as soon as the fugitives were coming into Ohio. They were being chased down. Citizens were required to assist in the recapture of the slaves. And this was a major factor in ginning up support for the Union cause in the Civil War, is that Ohio citizens didn't like being told they had to capture fugitive slaves.
You asked us about race and how to define race, and that's been an interesting topic. Have written about people of all different races in our careers as local authors. And the idea of race actually as a concept in our writing began before this book. We previously wrote a book on Italian Americans and the start of organized crime in America, and specifically in Ohio, which is where organized crime started in America. And it's really interesting because in the time period we're writing about, the Italian American immigrants were not considered white. I do tours occasionally, historic tours, and we talk about diverse neighborhoods, and the diverse neighborhoods are Black people and the white people, but also the Italians and the Irish living side by side, getting along. What we think of as race changes constantly. And so the idea, and race is a social construct anyway. There's nothing biological about any part of it. It's social, it's familial, it's a number of things. And especially at the end of the Civil War, race got really kind of mixed up and interesting. And that is what we talk about in the opening of our book.
Yeah. We also wrote a previous book too called Lynching and Mob Violence in Ohio, which really touches upon race and, you know, what we consider to be Black people, African-American people, were lynched out of proportion to their numbers. But one of the other factors was being an outsider. And that seems to be, you know, a real issue throughout history. Even if everybody looks the same, you can still identify those who are outsiders. Well, there are some things in the area. I mean, we've got pictures of things that are still standing. In most cases, there isn't anything standing there. In quite a few instances, they seem to be under reservoirs. It was land that was prone to flooding anyway, so.
We exist online as Exploding Stove, all one word. We are at Exploding Stove on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. We also are www.explodingstove.com. We recommend that you check that out because there were a lot of names of people that we were not able to include in this Black Settlements book. We have a limit on how many pages we have. So on our website, www.explodingstove.com, we have listed every single founder, former enslaved person's name for every settlement that we were able to find. So that is there.
But today they can buy them through Buckeye Book
But Buckeye Book Fair has signed copies that no one else has. So please check that out.